Good afternoon, class. My name is Christopher Ramirez, and today's presentation I'll be talking about the response to Iraq's invasion of Kuwait. The question that was presented to me was, in what ways was the response to the 1990 invasion of Kuwait by Iraq an example of collective security? So I wanted to define collective security before I moved on. Basically, in exchange for sovereign interest, states can cooperate in resolving problems with diplomacy rather than aggressions. This is the whole notion behind the UN. After World War II, the UN was created to prevent any future wars from happening. Basically, countries can run through this third party organization to prevent any aggressions between each other and take it to the UN court, for example. And it basically has this notion that every sovereign state's security dilemma is interrelated. In other words, there must be some basic rules that every actor should obey in the international arena. Namely, every state should respect each other's sovereignty. So, on August 2nd of 1990, Iraq decided to invade Kuwait, and this was assumed to have happened for many reasons, um, such as to control their oil wells and to have more resources. It was also assumed that they wanted to change the borders that colonialists had imposed on them, or it was also assumed to have happened because they had a war with Iran and had collected a large national debt. And so they wanted to invade Kuwait to collect resources and pay off their debt from the war. So after this invasion, it was largely condemned in the international community, and the United Nations decided to pass Resolution 660 that demanded that Iraq leave Kuwait, and this resulted in the first UN approved military force rather than the use of diplomacy and economic sanctions. Not that there wasn't any economic sanctions on Iraq, but this was one of the first UN approved uses of military force that was largely backed by the US. So in this slide, I have a map of Iraq and Kuwait that are both highlighted. This is to show that they're very close geographically, and Iraq had invaded that little space down under it, and that's called Kuwait. And the UN troops and United States troops were placed along the border of Saudi Arabia. That is a United States ally. They were all placed on the south side of Kuwait as well, to basically kick out Iraq and push all these Iraq forces back into their country. So this is the slide just to show this. So there was many steps to the resolution of this invasion. For one, the day after the invasion, neighboring countries around Iraq and the Arab League all condemned the invasion and criticized Saddam Hussein for it. The UN also condemned Saddam Hussein for these actions, but the leader, Saddam Hussein, was not ready to leave Kuwait due to individual and domestic level motivations. Uh, so the systemic level of criticism led to the UN making the Operation Desert Shield, which was explained in the last slide. Basically, it was that the troops along Saudi Arabia and South Kuwait were doubled, and this was to prepare to invade and expel any Iraq troops that were in Kuwait. Um, but before then, the UN had ordered the release of foreign hostages and imposed trade embargoes on Iraq. This included naval blockades and the cutting off of naval shipments. Um, in November of 1990, the UN gave Iraq until January of 1991 to leave Kuwait, or they were to make aggressions and have them removed forcefully. The invasion was codenamed Operation Desert Storm. So Cuba and Yemen and China were among the only countries to either disapprove or, in China's case, abstain from this action, which was led by the U.S. The UN had around 700,000 troops, 2,000 tanks, and 1,700 helicopters, all surrounded around South Kuwait and Saudi Arabia's border to prepare for this invasion. And Iraq, ultimately, Iraq had violated international law by invading the sovereignty of Kuwait. The treaty that was violated was the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648, which had stated that every state and their sovereignty must be respected. The invasion of Kuwait was a violation of this international law, and the UN was successful in February of 1991 when Iraq was expelled from Kuwait, and this is one of the best examples of UN-approved military force in history that was actually successful. So I wanted to include the future repercussions that this military aggression that was UN approved had, because it shows just how fragile collective security is. For example, Saddam Hussein, which was the person in power at the time in Iraq, was not replaced, and the only part of Iraq that was protected after were the oil wells. The United States stayed and occupied these oil wells in order to protect the interests of Saudi Arabia. But then the occupation of the United States in Iraq gave rise to the extremist Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden saw this occupation as a violation of Holy Land, and eventually this extremist leader led to the 9/11 attacks in 2001 of the Twin Towers. So I also wanted to include a slide with all the main actors of this invasion and the UN-approved military aggressions. Saddam Hussein is shown on the top left. He's Iraq's leader. And then George H.W. Bush was the United States president at the time. And Osama bin Laden is the extremist that later caused the 9/11 attacks that happened due to the fragileness of collective security. So, in conclusion, extracting Iraq from Kuwait was a perfect example of collective security, seeing as there was an international effort to condemn and criticize and punish Iraq for this invasion. It was a clear invasion of sovereignty towards Kuwait, a smaller state that's just placed under Iraq. And this is what collective security is basically about. It's preventing any violations of international law, whereas all the countries in the UN have signed into the UN, into following this international law, which is basically respecting each other's borders and sovereignty. The major success in this was the consensus of all states to perform this aggressive action of extracting Iraq troops. Without the consensus of states, there wouldn't be any form of backing of the United States and the UN to go into Kuwait and take out these troops. So overall, this was a perfect example of collective security, and I'm glad I got to do my presentation on it. Thank you.